Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls.
We're all children of God, but in what way do God's men actively strive to serve their Lord? At God's Men of Influence, we believe that when men are open to sharing their testimony, God's light shines into the darkness and sets loose His transforming power into our lives. Proverbs 27:17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another." Our mission is to create an environment where men can sharpen each other through the sharing of changed lives, and how through God's grace and mercy, we can become better husbands, better fathers, and better men in the service of His kingdom. Be blessed, be joyous, and be welcome here at God's Men of Influence.
Hey everybody, welcome to God's Men of Influence. You know, I got another great show here today, and I know I always say that, but I got to tell you, every single time I interview a new man, I just can't help but think how blessed I am and how wonderful our life is that we're here on the other side, able to tell our testimony, able to tell our story, in hopes of helping somebody out there right now that is struggling. And I say this all the time, but no matter what you're going through right now, I got to tell you, there is a way out. And no matter what that thing may be, maybe it's marriage problems. Maybe there was infidelity involved. Maybe there was drug abuse. Maybe there's substance abuse. Maybe there's financial ruin. I mean, who knows what it is? Whatever it is, though, and I got to tell you, it may seem like you've hit the bottom. It may seem like there's no way out. And a friend of mine one time said, I got to tell you, it can always get worse. Remember that. It can always get worse. But I got to tell you that one thing that has been the constant with every single one of these men that I've interviewed is that at some point in their life, when things were at their worst, they finally surrendered. They finally said, I give up. Lord, help me. Please help me. And when they did, it's amazing the burden, right, that was lifted off their shoulders. So today I want to introduce our guest. His name is Eric Botelho. Also goes by BZ. I'm going to ask him later why, because I still don't know. But Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Dino. Thanks for having me here. And I'm very, very grateful to get to have this conversation with you. And thanks for asking me. I feel honored for sure.
Well, so great to have you here. You know, I guess let's start with why BZ. What's the nickname?
Well, I wish there was just a better story. That BZ literally doesn't mean really anything. It just happens to be that I have a good friend named Buzzy. We were doing church together for years, and in that process, I guess everybody thought my name, which is Eric, and I used to just say I was Eric B, and it was too long for people, and they wanted something to flow, so they changed it from Eric B to B's to BZ, and I think that was because my partner in crime at the time was Buzzy, who was helping me pastor the church that I pastor. So.
Cool. Well, you know, I got that from your wife because your wife always calls you BZ.
And my wife, she swore she'd never call me BZ, and yet when we at our wedding night, you know, she's absolutely, it's going to be Eric. It's going to be Eric and Margot, and yet at the end we ended up putting BZ and Margot, and she called me BZ in our vows.
Oh, classic. Well, all right, Eric, I got to tell you, you know, there's a lot of stuff I want to get to here today. I want to get to know you and your story. You know, the very first question I always ask everybody is, are you ready to be exposed?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, you know, as much as you can be when you walk in to just hang out and do something like this, you know, but I mean, ultimately, you know, whatever is for God and whatever we can do for God to serve Him and help a brother or sister out there, then yeah, I mean, if that's what needs to happen.
So then let me start with, who are you today? How would you describe yourself?
Man, you know, I'm busy, and I don't know what that means, but really, I guess it's, you know, I want to be a good husband, a good dad, and you know, and a follower of Jesus. You know, it's important to me that people, you know, I'm not perfect, and I will struggle and do struggle, and yet, you know, that my hope is that as people look at me or my life or the things I do, that they, you know, somehow, some way get to see Jesus in and through it, and identify me as a follower of Jesus.
Cool. So what would you say your favorite verse is and why?
It's Matthew, in the book of Matthew, 11:28 through 30, and I'll read it for you. It's just so full, and it's just a short, simple burst from Jesus himself and it basically says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I think that just why that's my favorite passage is it's my experience. It's my experience with the Lord and just coming to Him to be relieved, to be released, to be ultimately transformed, which wasn't even necessarily what I was looking for when I stumbled upon Him. I had been clean and sober for 8-9 years by the time I went on a spiritual path, and in my sobriety, I had been an atheist and anti-God kind of guy most of my life, due to some circumstances and situations in my life, and so thinking I had it all together, living a sober life, and really realizing over the culmination of years that I was continuing to pack on burden after burden and stress after stress because of my holding on to my life and not surrendering to anything. I had nothing to surrender to, and so this passage really means a lot to me because it says, Jesus says, "Come to me, and all who are weary and burdened." And
so it's a lot like when I opened the show and I said, no matter what your situation is, the one thing that all the men on this show had in common is that they all dropped to their knees at some point.
Amen. And I think I had a couple 3-year journey. Well, it was probably a lot longer for sure. God was doing some really intentional things in my life, but of that surrender, of first coming in contact with Jesus and going, okay, I like this guy. I think this is something for me. And then ultimately, like the passage says, it says, "Take my yoke upon me and learn from me." And I did. I do. I'm still 14 or 15 years into this journey and still doing my best to learn and grow.
What would you say your biggest weakness is as a Christian?
Stubborn and
that's funny. That's also what your wife said.
I can have my mind towards something and go towards it and sometimes not necessarily pay attention or keep a mind or heart towards the people that might be between me, in the path between me and what I think I need to get done. And ultimately that plays itself out as my, I have a really strong feelings towards the term Christian and what that is and means in today's society. Yeah. And ultimately, if I'm a prophet, which I've never felt a prophet's call, then it's up to me to be the one to call out the church. But, and so I can do that. I have a struggle with Christians. I have a struggle with the church and how it looks, especially in South Orange County. Having never come into contact with the story of God, to read it for myself for the first time, and look at Jesus's words and look at his life and say, okay, this is what it looks like. You give up your whole life. He comes before everything, and then to go to church in South Orange County and realize that, we just go to church on Sundays for a couple hours, and then we really will probably not going to see a lot of those people again, and we just go live what we're going to do, and that's been a struggle. So I can be a pain in the buttocks and a bit of a jerk, especially if I think the judgment of what I see, and ultimately, God's figuring it out for people. It's I'm not God. Yeah. So I think that's probably my strongest weakness. It tends to separate me from churches and Christians because I feel like people are selling themselves so short of what it means to have the fullness of God.
But I got to tell you too, though, and it's just my opinion, obviously, but I feel like it's all in due time. Everybody has a timeline that has been set for them, and oftentimes it's part of what their journey has to be, right? It has to be like that oftentimes in order to get to where they need to be.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think you're right on that. And I think, like I said, I'm not perfect, and I have faltered and fallen in many ways on many different occasions. And so the reality is that God does have His plan, and He loves His church. And some of my favorite people in the world are scattered around the churches of South Orange County, living for Jesus in a really strong and powerful way. And I guess I just wish we all wanted more of Him and less of the other things, especially here in South Orange County, the leisurely lifestyle, the comfortable life. I mean, it's nice, but it's not necessarily what God called us to. The safe life. That's
safe life.
Nowhere in the scriptures does Jesus really talk about, okay, come to me and you're going to be safe.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous faith.
Yeah.
And I feel like, people miss out when they settle for the comfortable and the safe.
Sure. What about on the flip side? What's your biggest strength?
My biggest strength, I guess, is I feel like God's given me a faith. My biggest strength is I've had some radical encounters with the person of Jesus that has built a faith in me that can persevere and has persevered through a lot of trial and struggle. And I guess, by really, I had to answer every question, to get to Him, as an atheist, as someone who didn't believe, and, the premise that Christians would come at me with, of a hell or creation or whatever they came after me with, to get me to believe was not the premise I started from. Mm-hmm. So I never anticipated being someone who believes, let alone follows Jesus. So I think that has actually built a strength and deepened my faith in that way, because, no matter what, I can see God in it. And
so let me ask you this then. This is always the defining question that decides which direction this podcast is going to go. It's always the one that shows us everything. And the question is, have you ever had a dark time in your life? And if you need to talk a little bit about your past to get to that as well, to explain it, then
I think my early life is dark. My coming of age is rooted in dark, and so I'm a kid whose pops pieced out just due to whatever circumstances that had to do, and I was left to an awesome mom who was doing her best, but had to work 2 jobs in order to provide, and left me alone a lot from a very young age, which allowed me to get involved and engaged with a lot of things that you do when you don't have anybody around you, and ultimately she left me with people in our family who she thought I would be safe with, and from a young age I was sexually molested by a family member, up until I was 9-10 years old. My mom never really knew, and yet she did pull me out of that situation all of a sudden, now that I look back. And a lot of that defined who I would become over the next several years, just a deep hurt, sadness, pain, a distrust from, the people that were supposed to be taking care of you not doing so. And so that pushed me away from family and put me on the run with a group of guys, a crew. I wouldn't say it was a gang, but it was close to that. And then that got us involved with, the drug lifestyle and money and selling drugs and doing those kinds of things. And yet there was always a piece of me, tethered to my mom's, who, knew she had given up any kind of life to really try and make a way for me. So there was that battle inside of me of like, I'm going darker and darker and doing darker things. And this deep hurt and pain that kept getting shoved down and then covered up to the point that I didn't even remember the abuse for a lot of years. I pushed it down into my subconscious. And then so much of what I did was out of that hurt and brokenness. And I was fortunate enough to have a mother who fought like hell for her kid and did her best. She had her own struggles and was not there for a long time as well. Just hard being a single mom, but I think when she resurfaced she fought like crazy to try and get her son some help. So, and I feel fortunate. There's myself and my what I call my brother Brian, who moved down here, and I followed him later. Him and I are a couple of the, out of our small crew that ran together, two that are really the only ones left alive. Wow. And by the time I was 21 years old, my family, that crew that adopted me and I adopted them, or it was either drug overdoses, suicides, or other crazy deaths. And I think about that lives within me. It's why I think I'm, my wife says, you're always so happy, you're always so up, and I think it's because I realize I'm very fortunate. I probably shouldn't have made it through those times, and yet I did. And I can't even say I had a purpose, because there was no purpose. But I did have a mom that fought like hell to put me into treatment centers, and even though she didn't have anything, and make sure that I was had the best opportunity to get saved, I guess, from drugs and alcohol.
Was your mom a believer?
Mom wasn't a believer, but she's probably the closest. One of the, especially in her later years in life, one of the closest women, actual personalities or personas of close to Jesus, like the person of Jesus. She just loved big, and I think really when she looked back, she really regretted and had a lot of guilt over leaving me to what she left me to, but she, I remember the raddest thing, and it was, she passed away 3 years ago, and it's not a day that I don't think about her, and we love her so much, and wish she could be here with our daughter, but I can remember walking by her little bedstand, and she'd moved down here, and she was living behind my brother's house, and she had not been feeling good for a time, and I walked into her house, and I was walking to the restroom, and she loved to give me crap. She was super proud of me. I'd hear her bragging about the fact I was a pastor, and was doing all the things I was doing, serving out in the world, and yet, she would, those Christians, and the church is this and the church is that, and look what they're doing, and especially with politics, she'd lose her mind with the religious right and politics, and she, I remember walking by her nightstand one night, because her bed she had just a little studio, and I saw it in the corner of my eye. I saw a little New Testament. I'm like, you son of, and I grabbed that thing and I go, what's this? I go, hey, what is this?
Yeah.
And she looked down. She's like, you know what that is? I'm like, all the crap you give me for God and church and stuff like that. She goes, well, I never said I wasn't a fan of Jesus. I didn't like church. So I think my mom, she was raised from the South and in a deeply Southern Baptist tradition. Uh-huh. And her mother was, the hypocrisy, the abuse, and they saw in their little church really colored my grandmother for my mother. So my mother raised me to have no beliefs, because she didn't really, she said, you choose whatever you want to choose, but the church has not been anything good in our lives. And ultimately that was because the Catholic Church, which my father was connected to, is really wounded my family. My brother died of leukemia when he was 2 years old, and my father was a musician, and they'd been on the road since he was born. They would go across country playing for a month at a time, and my brother was never baptized because they just went on the road, and it wasn't anything they thought they needed to do. My dad was pretty close to Catholic Church. His family was pretty close, his parents. And when my brother got sick and died really quickly, they went to their priest and asked that he be buried. And, the Catholic practice is still not a practice today. It's still the theology today. But back then, 40 years ago, was, well, you didn't baptize him, so the priest can't do, your brother's in purgatory. He's not in heaven. Your son. And he can't be buried on holy ground. He can't be buried by the church. And
so, let's talk about that for a sec, because it's always been something that has, I guess, it's the unknown and bothered me a little bit at the same time. How can a child accept Jesus on his own, right? When he's days, weeks, months old and has no idea what's going on, and from my interpretation of the Bible, Jesus loves children. with a passion, no matter what, right? If something happened to a child, I can't imagine after reading the Bible that child wouldn't be allowed into
I know, right?
into heaven. It doesn't make sense.
It does make sense. What does he say? He says, rather that you have a millstone around your neck and you're thrown into the deepest sea than hurt one of these, speaking about the children. And, obviously, having never read the Bible, just having it in, some really harsh circumstances for my family, it's understandable why they would raise me as such. And, on this side, I see it as, on this side, having pastored in South Orange County, a very churched community for the kids that do come to church, and having a lot of youth and young adults in my church, I feel fortunate in many ways because I had to battle for my faith. I had to find God in the hard times, and through those I can see how he was there, and I got the opportunity to question and survive the questioning, find him, still have my encounters with him. So I feel fortunate in some ways because I sometimes see these kids coming to me and their experience has been to grow up in the church and not question and really not own their faith, and I feel so sad for them because I think, man, if you would just dig in, if there would be something that would cause you to just have to go after it, you don't have to be afraid of the questions. You got, our God is bigger than that. He's stronger than that. He's real. So yeah, that colored my upbringing. On this side of it, it's been something that I see as a strength in my life, but obviously difficult growing up in that, and their view became my view of what the church was, in many ways. So
what were your what'd you call it, your radical encounters or something that God presented himself to you?
I think when I look back at some people that he had put in my life that were not the typical, I guess, or the other Christians that I'd met in my life, the Christians that I would run into through high school and young adulthood when I was living that other lifestyle were consistently telling me how I was going to hell. Even a lot of my cousins had become born-again Christians, and I really didn't know anything about grace or love or faith. I knew a lot about hell, and it seemed to be the place I was destined to. So, that was in line with, what my grandmother's experience with the Baptist church and my mom's experience with the Catholic church. So, I think that, but, on my course of my 8 years of sobriety, as I moved from atheist to agnostic, God started putting some people in my life that really, that showed me that Jesus could and probably was real and was alive in people. And one of those guys was, I was dating his daughter, and he happened to be the president of Foursquare International. He was been a pastor for 30 years, and I would come over, and I had a Mongolian ponytail, like shaved head, ponytails, beads down my back. Like I looked crazy. Singing in a band, working in Hollywood as music, and this guy embraced me, accepted me, would have great conversations with me, never talked to me about Jesus or accepting or believing, just as a part of their family. And he was very warm to me and kind to me for over a quarter of time. And he was very he's smart, intellectual. I could respect his intelligence, and he was someone that a relationship grew between him and I as I was hanging out with his daughter and his family, and I can remember looking at him and finally just going, what is it? I don't get it. I can't get there. Like, what is it? So Jesus has talked to you. Obviously, Jesus has talked to you. So you've given up your whole life. You've gone around the world. You've done everything you've done. You've heard Jesus is like, you've seen him. I go, because I can't get to this faith place that you guys find. And he's like, Eric, he goes, I've been a pastor for 30 years. He goes, I've traveled around the world. I've been in Africa. I've seen miracles. I've seen healings and limbs restored. And I've experienced the deep voice of Jesus in my life. And he goes, all that to say, what really resonates for me, and this is Dr. John Holland is what he's telling me. He goes, I wake up every day, and there's many days I wake up and I don't feel anything, and I don't have that experience. He goes, and on those days I choose faith. And that was the first thing that really made a lot of sense to me, that like, whoa, okay, so this isn't about this charismatic, radical, Holy Spirit thing where you're seeing miracles all the time and you feel it. But that helped me to go on a path where I did have some encounters, when I did experience, I guess, the touch of Jesus, especially in the initial periods when I was coming to know him, when I was at the end of my 3-year agnostic journey. I tried Buddhism, religious science, and crystals.
Really?
I was really wanting, I knew
searching.
that I was searching, and I knew not having a God was not working for me anymore. I was getting caught up in horrible things. I'd been in 2 adulterous affairs, and I swore I would never mess around with a married person. It would not be something a part of me, because that's what my dad did. That's how my dad left my mom. And I was like, I'll never be connected to that. And yet, at 8 or 9 years clean and sober, I'm looking in the mirror and I'm seeing my father, and I'm like, and the thing that seems to be missing from my life, from everybody else around me who is sober and finding movement, is that they're able to surrender to something, and I have nothing.
So I'm curious, you tried Buddhism. What did that do to you?
That well, it was really in line with some of the practices of Alcoholics Anonymous and the spiritual practices and tools I was doing. But after about 6 months of going to meditate and really spending time reading through the tenets and trying to live in the tenets, I guess what I ended up coming to a realization that it felt really about me, which AA teaches you have no power. And it felt like I was, in order for Buddhism to work, it was about my working towards nirvana.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that didn't make sense, because I had been on my own, running my own life for many years, and I kept on coming up to the same place, which was desperate, empty, and broken and alone. So so that was just too much of my power, and it didn't resonate. And the crystals felt weird. I went to these little ashramas, and it might have been about a girl, following a girl there, and it was just weird.
Let's not knock that. There's a lot of girls that have brought guys to Jesus.
Amen. So I think it was religious science where it kind of went really well with my general theology at the time. I was like, if there is a God, then he'd present himself to the whole world, and religious science believed that God's a hub, and the major religions of the world are spokes to lead to God, and so I was like, I can dig that, and so I started practicing religious science and attending this little gathering, and I was given a book called Sermon on the Mount by a guy named Emmett Fox, and Emmett Fox is he's known as an AA spiritualist and a religious scientist, but he basically believed that Jesus was a great teacher, not the Son of God. And so I got this book, Sermon on the Mount, and I start reading it. It's literally the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm like, whoa, so this is Jesus. I had never encountered the Bible. I had never read the Bible.
Had you owned a Bible?
I had never owned a Bible. I'd heard a lot about it. I'd studied a lot against it. So, very well versed in attacking it, and yet I'd never read the words or anything about Jesus. So I read that book, and it blows my mind, and it gets me thinking. And I'm like, well, that's not the Jesus I was ever really presented. I had a couple encounters with a couple really phenomenal people, Dr. John Holland and one of my professors who was a poli-sci professor. And so
So how old were you at this time?
God, I'm 28, 30, maybe in that age.
And were you so you were in school at that time?
I was, I'd gone back to school at 25, 26. I was doing really well. I liked politics. I wanted to make a difference in the world. Thought that was the way. Found a professor who was the opposite of me. I was like the fiery liberal dude. She was the religious right soccer mom, loved God, but she would battle me and push me and and I remember thinking but she was very good to me. And she ultimately referred me to, the 2 schools I wanted to go to was USC and Berkeley, and she had connections at both, and I got accepted at both, and in their public policy and political science departments. And I just, another God shot, because I was like, why do you care? Why do you care that I know that I understand what I understand? She was like, because this country needs leaders that, really are rooted in in their beliefs and values. And I want you to, if this is what you believe, even though it's in opposition to everything I believe, I think you're a leader, and I think I want to, and I want to make sure that I'm helping you hone your ideas, values, and ethic.
Wow.
And like I love that lady. I got a hold of her years later just to let her know Jesus got a hold of me, because she never evangelized or sought to evangelize me, but man, just her life and how much she believed in me really was something special. And I didn't believe in a lot of stuff she believed in, but she believed in me and fought for me. And that showed me a lot.
That's so cool. You're answering a lot of my questions as we go, so I'm not even asking them. But one of the questions I ask is, was there a person that was influential in your walk, influential in helping you during a time of need or during a time of confusion or whatever it is? And the reason why I ask that question is because I feel like all of us can be that person for somebody, and we have to have open hearts, open eyes, open ears, and open arms, and just in case.
Yeah.
And sometimes it could be as simple as being in line at Starbucks, right? And somebody next to you just happens to say something, and you're there for them. Other times it's somebody and they're just really struggling, and they need to find their way. And in this particular case, this lady, didn't even believe, and yet she was helping you.
Yeah. Sally Dungan, John Holland, Sally Dungan, and then Marcus McClure. Those are a few of the people that, Marcus was probably the most brokenest pastor. And he's the pastor that the board installed me to take over for a few months. And he never came back, but God used him in some crazy, powerful ways, even though he's a really hurt kid. And
so, what church are you at?
I'm a pastor a little community called Sanctuary, and it grew up out of the young adult population of Capitol Beach Church, Capitol Beach Calvary back in the day. Mm-hmm. Pastor Chuck Smith Jr. Had identified Marcus. Marcus was doing a Bible study in a laundromat, and it was growing. And at its height, Sanctuary was about 1,000 people. By the time I got there 15 years ago, it was about 400 of us. By the time Marcus left, there was about 80. And we've been fluctuating ever since. But I took that call, and carried it on. I think, what he showed me is you could be in the brokenness. God reveals some beautiful things to people. It was one of the reasons he had to go away, among many, but he had, I was in charge of the prayer ministry at the time. There was 400 people in the church, and I would pray with people at the end of the night, and my team would pray with people. And one night he got up there, and he'd been struggling for a long time, but no one knew how bad. And he had talked about how his family had left him, and it was a shock to all of us, and that he had had a shotgun in his mouth, and that caused a lot of shock waves, made a lot of people really angry with him, and the church went from 400 to 80 in 1 week.
Wow!
But I would say probably those 80 were in my prayer room that night, and we prayed all night, because the story I heard over and over again was, I thought there was something wrong with me, that I was sober depressed, I wanted to take my life, and yet my pastor just shared that he thought about taking his life and he didn't, and it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't mean that God doesn't love him, and he can't be a part of this crew and this body. Yeah. And I think that night has kind of defined our community ever since.
Yeah.
We have victory in Christ, but my church week after week, our church week after week is 75% unchurched non-Christians.
Wow.
And we're, this week we're at about 120 people showing up.
Yeah.
We share Jesus,
right.
Not unapologetically. I say over and over again, I adore Jesus. But I was allowed a long journey to come to him. And I go, and one of the things I love most about Jesus is he lets you belong before you believe. And I go, and this community is about belonging before you believe, and we don't want to usurp God's role in your life, so you can have your encounters. So
Yeah. Let me ask you this now. Fast forward a little bit from that period of time in your life.
yeah.
Tell me what you've done. I think you've gone to seminary,
Yeah.
right? So that's a major accomplishment.
Yeah, I didn't really know my faith that well. I mean, when they installed me as the leader of this church, I was really well versed in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I could read it, backwards and forwards. I could quote it. I didn't know the Bible that well. I just read the New Testament, read a lot about Jesus. So, I thought maybe that was something I should do, is go learn about my faith, and I really enjoyed seminary. It's not necessarily anything that's I needed in my life as far as for degrees or whatever, but the education has been unbelievable, phenomenal to help me, I guess know my God, know our history.
Yeah.
And our tradition.
Yeah, it's something I want to do. Like, I think when my kids are a little bit older,
Yeah.
I want to take some time and do that for myself. Just
It's so
sounds
cool.
amazing.
It's cool. My wife would like to do that as well. She'd be great at going through that, because it gave me so much more depth to my faith, and I love history anyway. So to have the opportunity to dig through that theologically and biblically, and oh my gosh, it's been really, really cool. To heal the wounds of from the Catholic Church, and understand their falterings and failings, and seeing how much. And nowadays, it's in this new movement for the Catholics, they have something beautiful in their reverence for the Lord that in the Protestants, we're pretty. Hey, come as you are, come in your shorts, and when I go to a Catholic Mass, and I see that, I just go, wow, that's pretty special.
Yeah. And then you own a recovery alcohol or a sober living and recovery center, and
Sanctuary House, South Shores, Anchored Recovery. We almost 10 years ago, I'd shut Sanctuary down because I felt like, okay, it was Marcus's call, not my call. I immediately knew I made a mistake, but I was like, okay, that's fine. I got hired on at another church, and I had worked there for a couple of years, and I didn't really like it. I didn't like working for the church. I didn't like drawing my paycheck. I didn't like the staff meetings. I didn't like the business model of church, and so it wasn't for me. So I missed what I was doing. I felt like I was supposed to be doing what I had been doing, and I didn't know how to financially support myself. And luckily at the time I wasn't married. Thank God I got married after. But I felt like there wasn't a lot of good sober living homes. I knew a friend who owned a rehab. I felt I can live with 8 guys. I can help them grow their sober foundation. And if there's some of them want to grow in their faith, I can disciple them. I can mentor them. I can guide them. And so I started Sanctuary House at the same time. After a 2-year hiatus, replanted Sanctuary Church. So, and I feel like I've backed into everything I'm doing. Sanctuary House was me and 8 guys, and it just grew and did really well, and was always full. And we went from 1 homes to 2, added a female home, went to 4, 5, 6, 7. We're now at 8 homes, 110 people around South Orange County.
Wow. In
our sober living homes. We're still all full, still have a waiting list, and there's still the same mission of helping people build the sober foundation, holding them accountable, giving them people, belonging, community. And then for those, usually my leaders, as they identify the call in their life, start to mentor, disciple them. And then out of that grew South Shores Detox and Residential Center, because we were realizing we could maybe do something really special there on a small, individualized, customized level. And then from there grew the outpatient program, which is now Anchored Recovery Community, and
awesome.
And here in San Juan. And I love being in South Orange County. It's sad to me. I understand why people don't like me and what I do, because they don't like it next to them. And there's been some really tough houses and some companies that don't care that much about their community. But I've been transplanted here 17 years. I love everything that I've been given here, and I love being in South Orange County.
Let me ask you this: somebody approached you after listening to this podcast and said that they were really struggling, and they didn't. Their faith wasn't there. In fact, they didn't believe in God. They were alone. They were empty. They were broken. What advice would you give a person like that?
I'd probably just ask them to come hang out and spend some time and try to be there with them in those places. I've been in those places now, walking with Jesus and with the Lord for 14, 15 years. I've had those times as well on this side, and I'm very grateful for a faith and a choice to believe. But I mean, I think it's, I would do my best to listen to them, hear them, and hopefully be there with them along the journey. Not try to fix it, not try to fix them, but let them know that, hey, while I wouldn't want this for you, I'll be here amidst this darkness or pain, and however that looks. And I think that's if that person was put into my life as a part and asking that question, then obviously there's something for me in it to be there as well.
Sure. And last question, what does it mean to you to be a God's man of influence?
Man, a God's man of influence. Well, it means that I'm personally responsible, that I am a follower of Jesus Christ, the living God, and He's brought me out of not only death and destruction one day, but death and destruction here every day, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in every way, and so what it means for me is that every day I have a responsibility, that I take the burden on. It's light, I take that yoke. It's light, right. And ultimately that means because it's not me trying to help or save people. It's Him, and in and through me. It's an honor, and that's our prayer a lot of times is, thank you, Lord, for honoring us with the opportunity to serve the people you've given us to serve. It's truly an honor. Yeah.
So if somebody's listening right now and just needs a little bit of guidance or help or anything, is there an email address or a way that they might be able to get a hold of you?
Yeah. My email address is ericbz, ERICBZ, at anchoredrc.com. And that's ANCHOREDRC.com, anchoredrc.com. So
for those of you that didn't catch it, RC stands for Recovery Center. Look them up also on the internet. Website is? Gosh,
we have so many. OC Sanctuary House, OC Sanctuary, South Shores Recovery, anchoredrc.com.
Or I'll tell you what, go to godsmenofinfluence.org and you'll be able to see Eric's podcast there. Just click on it. We'll have all the show notes as well, and you'll be able to have all his contact information there.
Awesome.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us and opening up.
Yeah.
Thank you. And for all you guys listening, if you guys, again, have any questions, go to our website and you can reach out to either myself or to BZ over there, godsmenofinfluence.org. Also, if you're sitting there tooling around on Facebook right now, type in God's Men of Influence, hit the like button. You'll be able to see everything we do there as well. Twitter, our name is. See, I got it right. I don't handle the Twitter site, so it's God's Men Podcast. All right, guys, thank you so much, and remember, be blessed, be joyous, and always be welcome to God's Men of Influence. We'll see you next time.